May the words of my lips and the meditations of my heart be now and always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord. Amen. So tonight today we're commemorating the conversion of St. Paul. And I wanted to start this sermon tonight by talking about Veronica Rochester. Veronica Rochester was born in the second half of the 19th century. She was born in Bristol to Polish Jews after her parents had left their native Poland. And it's reasonable to assume that the widespread pogroms against the Jews at that time in Eastern Europe would have been on her parents' mind when they moved to Bristol. In tonight's second reading, the cultural, religious and social conflict that Paul tried to diffuse in his speech by centering it on the person of Christ has been repeated again and again, down and expanded through history, but instead turned against Jewish people. The irony is that in Paul's speech, he's trying to show that Jesus is Jewish and is for the Jews as well as being for the Gentiles. Now, Veronica Rochester when she grew up, she met an Irish Catholic named James. They fell in love and married. At that time, this was rare, but when she married James, Veronica also took on James's Catholicism and attended Mass every day of her life from then on. And this makes Veronica's story relevant to Paul's speech tonight, and also to that we are commemorating his conversion. Now, after this happened, Veronica's father apparently didn't talk to Veronica for many years. His reaction is understandable given what was going on in Eastern Europe at the time, and Veronica's move away from Judaism must have been very distressing for him. But back to Paul. In his speech we heard tonight, Paul also makes a point of his own Jewishness to try and diffuse the situation he was facing. And in recent years, scholars have strongly argued that Paul never gave up his Jewishness. Instead, that for Paul, Christ replaced the Torah, and that was all that he changed. But Paul, claiming his Jewishness and Jesus' Jewishness as well, in the reading from Acts 22 that we heard tonight, it didn't help Paul, even though just a few days previously he had publicly undertaken the rites of purification in the temple, as in chapter 21 tells us. But the big thing he does in this speech is that he connects Jesus also as one of them, of the people that he was arguing with. And he uses Ananias as a character witness in this, who is well known to the Jews. But in repeating his encounter with Jesus on the Damascus Road, Paul is emphasizing a very important thing across the centuries. Yes, he does point out the importance that Jesus was a Jew like them. That's the reason Jesus says to Paul in verse 8, I am Jesus of Nazareth. But in meeting Paul on that road in the noonday sun, the risen Jesus is God, who is neither Jew nor Gentile. And later on, in verse 15, Paul is to be the witness of that to all the world. And it's that noonday encounter, the importance of that encounter, that enabled Paul to say that Jesus was for his fellow Jews in that speech, and why he could say he was going on to the Gentiles. Yet we've often ignored this about that noonday encounter, of Jesus as the bridge for all nations in meeting Paul like that, instead casting it as Paul's conversion. And I think tonight that calling it Paul's conversion is perhaps misapplied, and his speech would show that it's more about Jesus' relation to both Jew and Gentile, not what happened to Paul. But however, coming back to Veronica Rochester, She exchanged her Jewish identity, but Paul's encounter with Jesus on that road shows it was never meant to be that way. Now, the reason why I'm talking about Veronica Rochester, who you've never heard of, is because her story is personal to me, because Veronica was my grandmother. But in the early 20th century, Veronica felt she had to give up her identity. For me, it has come full circle because I was brought up Protestant, but very importantly, my sister-in-law is Jewish. And so in this generation now, once again, my family has a whole tribe of Jewish relations by marriage in Sydney. And this tribe has been amongst my biggest cheerleaders in my progress to ordination, if not the loudest. And if I'm in Sydney in December, Christmas is a combination of a big Christmas Day celebration, along with Hanukkah observances, trooping to various people's homes for those observances before and after Christmas. And is this syncretism? No. It's God's grace for Jew and Gentile, as the Damascus Road shows. So my relations have their identity as Jews, and my identity is as a Christian. But my training as a priest has been no barrier for them. Instead, it's my responsibility to reflect Jesus on that road to Damascus to them, and their acceptance of me is reflecting Jesus right back at me. I want to talk a bit more about this tribe of people because their loud acceptance of me by that tribe in Sydney shows that the conflict Paul had with that crowd is not inevitable. And we cannot, as Christians, claim any cultural and religious superiority over the Jews that Paul was seeking to reach out in that speech. And our reading tonight from Isaiah sums up why Paul said Jesus was for Jew and Gentile as a future-looking thing, because in the context of God restoring Israel from exile, in verse 6 of our reading from Isaiah, we hear Isaiah say, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the survivors of Israel. I will give you as a light to the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. Or as what Paul said in his speech in verse 14 of Acts 22, about Ananias affirming what Jesus said on that road. The God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear his own voice. So for me personally, the risen Jesus meeting Paul on the Damascus road as neither Jew nor Gentile is very important. And as we leave here tonight, as commemorating Paul's conversion, I'm just thankful that rather than signifying his conversion, Paul was more concerned about presenting Jesus both for us here tonight and that noisy bunch of relatives of mine back in Sydney. Amen.